Hi, everyone. We'll just wait for a couple minutes here as people filter in. Thanks so much for joining us today. Great to see you all. As people join us, we'll get started in just a couple minutes here. I, I'm going to go ahead and get us started because I think we have a critical mass. Um, Welcome to the first of four Community Advisory Committee meetings for the Connect 2045 Long Range Mobility Planning process. My name is Dave Roth, and I'm the project director, and I'm also the planning director with Lane Transit District. We're really grateful that you volunteered to join us on this journey of a project. We had over 40 applicants for the committee, and we selected 19, those of you who are here to participate as we move forward on this project. Your participation is really important. I want to emphasize that you were selected because you represent a diverse set of communities, demographics, geographies, life experiences. You may represent organizations that represent broader groups within the community. And in some way or another, you each touch transit, whether you're an active rider or not. So really excited to have you here. As part of this process and being part of this committee, you're going to help us more effectively navigate the types of trade-offs and decision points that are just inherently part of making transit decisions. And if you did take some time to read the article that Carrie included in the meeting invite, kind of get a sense of some of the trade-offs and decisions that we make with the resources that we have. So again, I'm just really excited to have you here. This is the first of four meetings. We're going to try to meet for the next two meetings in person if we can. We'll have a hybrid option for those that can't be there in person. In the last meeting, we'll do another virtual meeting. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to our consultant team, and we'll do some additional introductions with the project team. And then we'd like to hear from each of you who you are and who you might represent. So with that, I'll hand it off to Ryan, I think, and or Ashley, you can help us with the rest of the intros.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Ryan Farncombe. I'm with a company called Parametrics. We're working with Dave and Carrie to help develop this plan. So thanks very much for your time on this. I'm going to pass it to Ashley, and then why don't I just call first names after that, and we'll get through everybody that way.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Price, also part of the project team, and I'm with Nelson Nygaard. Nice to meet you all.
And let's
Thanks,
also,
Ashley.
before we go into committee members, let's introduce other LTD staff who are here. So if we can get Carrie, Eric, and Brandon to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Carrie Asklar. I'm an associate planner at Lane Transit District and also the deputy project manager for this project. So you've probably received an email or two from me, and feel free to email me if you do have questions about anything about the committee. So glad that you all are here. Thanks.
My name is Eric Bridenstine. I'm the Director of Marketing over here at Lane Transit District and looking forward to working with all of you. So thank you for being here.
Hi, I'm Brandon Mutlin. I'm having a hard time getting my camera working right now, but I'm a planner here with LTD and just excited to get this project going.
Okay, is that everybody from LTD? All right, so let's start with Alyssa. You're muted, Alyssa.
Okay, now can you hear me? Yes. Okay, Alyssa Brownlee from Mackenzie Bridge, Oregon. We own Horse Creek Lodge and Outfitters, and among other things, we provide transportation for visitors in the area who are going to hike our trails, bike our trails, raft our rivers. So we provide some transportation services and are really tied into the tourism community up here. And yeah, happy to have been invited and looking forward to seeing where this goes. Thanks.
Thanks for being here, Alyssa. How about Heather?
Hi everyone, I'm Heather Gabbert. I am a market development officer for Summit Bank. We're locally headquartered here in Eugene, Oregon.
Thanks, Heather. Carlos?
Hello, everyone. My name is Carlos Lepe. I work for St. Vincent de Paul Society of Lane County. Currently, I'm serving as the Emergency Response Manager. One of the ways that we coordinate with LTD for my program, Egan Warming Centers, when we activate folks who are going to be utilizing those services, will hop on an LTD bus, and that's how they get to us. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Carlos. How about Larissa?
Hi, everyone. Really glad to be here. I'm Larissa Ennis, she, her pronouns. I work with Food for Lane County, and I'm on the board of Homes for Good, and I'm on the steering committee of Act Now Lane, which is a housing and homelessness collaborative. So a nexus of basic needs. Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Eric?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. He, him. I live in the Bethel community. I'm on the active Bethel Community Neighborhood Association Board, on the Eugene Airport Advisory Committee, and there was something else too I thought was pertinent, but I can't remember what it is. Too much pressure, too many people looking. Anyway, I'm very pleased to be with you working on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Braden?
Hi, everyone. Braden Ravenscraft. I live in Eugene, but I work for Mackenzie Community Land Trust, a nonprofit helping to rebuild after the Holiday Farm Fire. And we have employees kind of all over Lane County, so we utilize that 91 bus to get up the Blue River. But we're also in an unincorporated community helping to advocate for the needs of the community and helping connect the folks up there who are isolated from the services in Eugene.
Awesome. Thank you, Braden. Martina?
Hi, everyone. I am Martina Shabram. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Executive Director of Sexual Assault Support Services. We are Lane County's Rape Crisis Center, and we support survivors of sexual violence in the acute aftermath. So we support a lot of folks who need bus transportation, often to or from the hospitals, and more broadly throughout Lane County.
Thanks, Martina. And then I think we have Burks. Sorry if that's a last name, but.
Hi, my name is Becky. I am a student at LCC majoring in human services, and I use public transportation pretty much on a daily basis.
Thanks, Becky. Appreciate it. Alejandro?
Hi there, Alejandro Quadros. I use he, him pronouns. I work as a dual general manager for the La Quinta Inn and Suites and Comfort Inn and Suites in Springfield. Used LTD myself as well as using the group pass for staff members and things like that in the area. I work for the broader company of Merite Hotel Management as well. So excited to be here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alejandro. Jacob?
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Jacob Bucks, Executive Director at Homes for Good. So Homes for Good provides a home to 5,000 people across Lane County, and the partnership with LTD is super important, and public transportation is very much needed by the people we serve.
Thanks, Jacob. Liz.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Dolliger. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and owner of Merite Hotel Management. So in addition to the 2 hotels that Alejandro mentioned, we have 6 hotels, soon to be 7 in Lane County. We'll open a 7th out in Florence, actually. But here on behalf of our hotel associates, we employ a number across the 6 hotels in the Eugene Springfield area. Our corporate office is located in Springfield. I reside in Coburg. And I'm also obviously interested in impact to the tourism community. I serve on the executive board of Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association as well.
Great, thanks, Liz. Jesse?
Hey everyone, my name's Jessie Preston. I use she, her pronouns. I live out in Veneta and I serve on the CCO Community Advisory Council. I also serve on the Ride Source Executive Committee, LRAPA, and more related to this specifically, I've been doing work with the Lane County Transportation Equity Assessment, where we've been going out to places like Blue River, Cottage Grove. We're doing Veneta this week. We're trying to get out to Deadwood to ask the people who live there what they need and how we could better serve them.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Stella.
Hi everyone, my name is Stella. I'm a rising senior at the University of Oregon. I'm studying planning, public policy and management and environmental design. And right now I'm working for Medford Water as a water efficiency and land use intern this summer.
Great, thanks, Stella. Jacob?
Hello, my name is Jacob Kirchner. I am a daily LTD rider and Eugene resident, and I work for a nonprofit called HIV Alliance, which some of our clients utilize LTD, and we also connect them with other local services throughout the community and help prevent further spread of infectious diseases.
Great, thanks, Jacob. Carly? Carly?
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry. I'm Carly Blimmel. I'm the Behavioral Health Executive Director for Coakwell Health and Wellness, and I am having technology difficulties, so I apologize. Coakwell serves the members of federally recognized tribes with primary care, behavioral health, and opioid treatment services in Lane County and Coos County. And I'm really excited to participate.
Great, thanks, Carly. Is there anybody I missed? Okay, perfect score. Great. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your time on this project. Dave, should I pull up the presentation, or Carrie, were you going to pull up the presentation? We could do it either way.
Whatever you're most comfortable with.
I'm going to pull up the presentation because I've got like 3 screens today, so I can do all the things. But sorry, Dave, did you want to say anything else before I kind of pull the presentation up?
No, I mean, I think it's just great to hear from all of the different people that we've got on this committee. I think I'm really excited to be working with this group. I think we have a really diverse set of voices here. And yeah, just to reiterate the value that you're going to bring to this project over the next year as we get into it. I'm really excited about the outcomes that we're going to see from this project and the long-term impacts for not only LTD, but the communities that we serve. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Great. Okay, can everybody see the front screen of the presentation? Cool. So before I get into this, I just want to note, we have a little bit of presentation up front here, just kind of what is this project? What are we doing with you all over the next months? But we do want to spend a good chunk of the evening tonight having a discussion. We have some questions for you all. But as we're going through this, feel free to raise your hand if you have a question or a comment or anything like that. I will do my best to keep an eye out for those raised hands, but I'll be looking to my esteemed colleagues to tell me to shut up if I've skipped over somebody's hand. So our agenda, again, project overview process. We'll get through that here in about 10 minutes, and then we do want to spend a little time talking about transit and the mobility toolbox. So what are the kinds of tools that we'll be thinking about as part of this process, right? Because they actually go beyond the bus that we're all familiar with that comes to the stop regularly every day, right? There's other kinds of mobility tools out there, like bike share, for example, that are on the table for us in terms of discussion as we go through this process. So we'll go through that a little bit. And then we want to talk about vision and goals. And this is really a discussion with you all about what you see as working well today, what needs there are, where we kind of headed in the next 20 years with all of this. And then we'll wrap up. So what is Connect 2045? So this plan is a long-range plan that helps guide regional investments and decision-making for the next, ideally, 20 years. The plan is about helping to set expectations. So it sets expectations both with the public in terms of how is LTD and its partners going to improve or change service in the future. And it also sets expectations within LTD in terms of where the agency is headed and with LTD's partners, like the City of Eugene or City of Springfield, who play a big part in all of this as well. So ideally, the plan, when we're done, helps LTD and partners and all of us say, we've got a decision to make about something. What would the plan tell us to do, or which direction would the plan tell us to go? So that's what we're kind of trying to work towards. So we're going to establish priorities. How are we investing in transit and mobility in the region? We'll talk about funding. How are we going to pay for all these things? The reason we're doing this now is the last time the plan was updated was over 10 years ago, and a lot has changed. And so this is a good time to reevaluate the path forward. So we've got a number of steps in our overall plan process. The first couple of things we're doing now are reviewing existing plans and policies, right? So we want to understand what's already been said about where we're going in the future before we start this planning process. And then setting goals and objectives helps us to establish both where we're headed, but also what do we see the needs in the region with respect to those goals. And then they also help us down the line with priorities. So based on our goals, how are we prioritizing certain investments or decisions? What we're also doing as part of this, and we'll share more of this with you next time, is called existing and future conditions. And that means we're taking a look at what does LTD offer today in terms of service? Who rides it? How many people ride it? Where do the services go? But also looking at things like land use. Where are the important land uses in the region that we need to know about, right? Whether they're served by transit today or might want to be served by transit in the future. This helps us get to an understanding of needs, which is like, what do we want to try to address as a region? And then improvement options, which is what are the things we think we'd like to do to try to address those things? Resources are limited, right? So we're going to come up with, and working with you all, we're going to come up with these improvement options, but we're going to have to make some choices, right, about which path we're going down once we get a little bit later in this project, because we probably can't do everything, right? And then the final product is that Connect 2045 plan that ideally, again, is kind of a useful tool for LTD moving into the future. I think I've said a lot of these things already. One thing I didn't talk about is we also ideally want to include some near-term actions as part of this planning process, right? So we've done all this great work to develop a plan. What are a couple of things we can do right off the bat to make progress on the things we want to make progress on? So we'd really like to get to those as part of this process. And then also evaluation or performance measures. So how are we going to measure progress on the things that we care about? So we intend to establish those measures as part of this as well. So here's our overall schedule. So here we are, summer 2026. So we're probably coming back to you all a little bit later this fall to talk more about existing and future conditions and getting into improvement options. I know we haven't set our next meeting yet, but we will. Our intent is to wrap up this whole process by fall 2027. So your collective role in this project is we'd really appreciate your perspective on the transit and mobility needs and issues in the region. So we've got quite a diversity of perspectives here, which is awesome because we need all of those perspectives to understand the full spectrum of needs and issues across the region. So we're really looking for your help to make sure we're understanding all of the issues and not missing something. When we get a little bit deeper into the project too, and we do more general public outreach, we'll message you all because we'd really appreciate your help kind of helping us get the word out about like open houses or surveys and things like that. So that would be a big help. And we'd also appreciate it if you could strive to attend all 4 of our meetings. We'd really appreciate your time at all of these. And so just briefly, in terms of the decision-making process overall, so you along with our technical advisory committee, which is more like staff working for agencies across the region, are advising us throughout this process. But ultimately, the board is making a decision as to whether to adopt the plan. And we're also talking with the board at several touch points as we develop this plan throughout. So this is briefly, as I said, we have also outreach to the general public in a number of ways and at a number of points throughout this process. And LTD's community outreach framework is really going to kind of guide how we have that conversation with the broader community throughout. And in terms of some of the things we'll be doing besides these meetings with you and the board are small group meetings and public events like open houses, tabling, in-person activities, online materials as well. So we're trying to do a very broad-based outreach to talk to as many people as we can. Before I pass it off to my colleague, Ashley, are there any questions about kind of the role of this group or what we're on about with the Connect 2045 process or anything like that? Okay. So Ashley, I'll pass it to you.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. So like Ryan mentioned, I'm going to just walk us through an overview of some of the transit mobility service types that are kind of in LTD's wheelhouse or toolbox. I think a lot of them you'll be familiar with, maybe some a little less familiar. But the goal here is really just to kind of ground us in all the different kind of mix of tools that we'll be exploring during the Connect 2045 process. So kind of first one to the left of your screen is high capacity transit. Best example of this is MX. And so for high capacity transit, we're really talking about those high ridership routes that are moving a lot of people and connecting those like key destinations that are busiest and most populated. So, you know, your commercial clusters, your shopping centers, your libraries, the places that people want to go. And typically these are kind of your most high ridership routes, right? Most high frequency routes, sort of having enough service to meet that high demand. And then following on from that, you've got your fixed route service, which you can kind of think of as like the rest of the bus network. So your Route 11, your Route 41, what have you. As the name suggests, these are routes or lines that follow kind of a defined or designated path. And depending on sort of what part of the service area they're reaching or what kind of riders they're trying to reach, those buses are going to operate at different frequencies from line to line and also at different frequencies throughout the day. Our next service type is on-demand service or microtransit service. Great example of this is the Cottage Grove Connector. And so one of the kind of distinguishing features of this kind of service is that it operates in a very sort of defined service area or zone or limited sort of service zone. These are typically based on same-day trips that you book either through an app or calling into a call center, and then all of the pickups and drop-offs happen within that sort of designated zone. Next one, Ryan. And then our next kind of service type is paratransit or NEMT or non-emergency medical transport. Great example of this is RideSource. So this is a service type that's limited to only those riders who are ADA certified, and sort of another kind of service type that you have to schedule, but this one happens up to 24 hours in advance. And then pickup and drop-off locations are typically located within 3/4 of a mile of that fixed route service. Then our next service type is mobility subsidy programs. People might be familiar with mobility wallets, but the idea here is that there is some kind of subsidy or discounted fare for transportation trips broadly. And so this can be things like a taxi voucher or discounts for your Uber or Lyft trips or for a micro mobility trip. So very broad ranging. And also eligibility for these programs can kind of have different levels. They can be open to sort of the full rider network or limited based on income, for example. And then the third one on this slide, shared micromobility. That's your bike share, your scooter share, and this is kind of, standard bikes and scooters or e-assist versions. Typically, these are going to be best for your sort of shorter trips, your 1 to 3 mile trips within the neighborhood, or what we talk about, that kind of first mile, last mile, getting from fixed route service to your destination. And then our last kind of group, van pool. So good example of this, commute with enterprise. So this is a service type obviously really geared towards commuters and people who are making those sort of longer 20-mile or more trips. The idea here, 5 to 15 people get together to form a van pool, and sort of that cost of commuting is shared between those folks, and sort of the idea of getting them out of single occupancy vehicles and sharing the trip. And then it's typically some kind of subsidy or incentive for participating in the van pool program. And then lastly, we've got volunteer driver programs. Great example of this, Ride Connection in Portland. Typically you see nonprofit organizations or groups of nonprofit organizations coming together to provide this volunteer service. It's really great in rural areas or those areas where there's a bit of a unmet transit need or transit gap. And the idea here is that volunteer drivers get reimbursed for providing the service based on mileage. So quick overview of service types. And then one more bit before we get into a little bit of discussion is just noting that all of these service types kind of have their own best use case or context, depending on sort of what the trip type or the ridership level is. And so, like we mentioned, something like MX or a high capacity transit service is going to be best where there is more ridership, more density, where you can employ those larger vehicles that carry more people. But for lower ridership context, perhaps a more rural area, something like an on-demand service or a volunteer service is going to better fit or meet that need. Sort of the same concept applies with the length of trips. So for those shorter trips, something like your shared micromobility could be an option, but you're probably not going to want to ride your bike or scooter, more than 25 miles. And so something like a van pool might make more sense depending on the context. So all that to say that, part of the calculus of planning service is trying to sort of match the service type with sort of what the trip needs are. So that is a quick overview of service types and toolbox. And before I turn it over to Ryan to get us into a little bit of conversation around this, any just questions? Jesse.
Is there a volunteer driver program in this area?
Dave, I might actually pass that to you.
There is not one that I'm aware of, a formal one. I believe there may have been some volunteer drivers in the past down in the Cottage Grove area, but as far as I know today, there's no established formal program.
If I can just chime in here, I would say at least in Mackenzie Bridge, and I think the same is true probably in Oak Ridge, there is an unofficial volunteer driver network. We all sort of like check in with our neighbors, who needs to go where. We're going into town, we have some extra seats. Do you need to go to an appointment? Do you want us to pick up groceries? But I love the idea of a more, I don't want to say formal, but a more organized way to do this. So I think that if we looked into it, there are probably a lot of what would fall into like volunteer driver networks, but it may not be like an official thing that's organized through LTD.
Yeah, I think Alyssa, you hit on a really good point. I know there's one in Florence that focuses on getting folks to medical appointments in Eugene and Springfield. And if folks are interested, I'll just drop this link. But yeah, it's uh, not as formal of a service.
Great, thanks for those points.
Any other questions about service types? I mean, this will come up multiple more times as we talk with you. So this is certainly not the only opportunity to talk about these. Okay. Thank you, Ashley.
Yep.
So this concludes the most of the us talking at you section of this meeting. So thanks for bearing with us through that. So there's some discussion questions here, and I'm going to read these off, and then I'm going to go off camera for a minute to close the blinds because the sun is blinding me in this office right now. But the first set of questions kind of revolves around these different services. So even if you haven't used these, some of these services, I'm sure many of you know folks who have, right? Or have encountered folks who have. So I'm curious, what's, broadly speaking, working well today in terms of supporting the community's mobility needs? And then what barriers do people face in using transit or accessing these mobility options we just talked about?
I don't know how to raise my hand on this app. I cannot find that, but anyway, I would say up in the Mackenzie region, we're on the far east end, just as, Florence is on the far west end. So we're kind of in an outlying area with limited access, but, for many of our residents up here, the Route 91 bus that takes them to and from Eugene is a lifesaver, and it allows them to get to school, get to work. I would say, so that works well. I think even though there's not, 10 different stop times up here, coming and going, getting people to or from Eugene in the morning and to and from Mackenzie Bridge in the afternoon, like that works well for our community. But the challenges are, particularly in our busy season, when we've got lots of recreational, visitors who want to come up and go mountain biking or hiking or go camping, and they may not have access to their cars or whatever. There are limited numbers of spaces for bikes, for example. There's limited availability, limited transit times, especially like busy weekends. So I know that it's a little complicated to say, oh, let's, add a bunch of routes or add a bunch of times, to get people up and back during the busy season. But that's one of the challenges we see up here. And then once people are up here, for example, one of the services that we offer at Horse Creek Lodge, just because we've seen a huge need for it and we want to keep the highway safe, is we've started doing almost free wedding shuttles for wedding groups that are getting, they're getting married at one of the venues up here, and all of their guests are, staying at local lodging partners, and there's no Uber up here, and they want their guests to be able to, enjoy their time at the wedding and receptions. And so we coordinate with the couples to come up with a route and a time to get people to and then from the wedding, just to keep the highway safe and, keep fewer cars on the road. So I think that these, especially in rural communities, and I think the same is probably true in Oak Ridge and in Florence, those community partners that can do that, like the last 5 miles of transportation, like getting people up here on the LTD bus to go mountain biking on the trail or go hiking or go camping for the weekend. They get dropped off at the ranger station. They coordinate with us or other shuttle providers to get them to the trailhead or get them to the campground. And then they coordinate with us again to get from, those places back to the bus stop at the end of their adventure, and they go back home. So I think that coordinating more with some of the local transportation options in these rural areas, I think would be really helpful. And, not that that's not already happening, but that's just something that I always think about, like, how can we coordinate better with LTD?
That's great. Also, yeah, thank you for highlighting the rural needs, and then also, access to recreation, which is sometimes something we don't think about. So a great point. So I didn't exactly see the order the hands went up, but let's go Becky, Jesse, and Eric.
I use LTD very regularly. I don't know how to drive, and public transportation has been my main source of transportation throughout my entire life. I am currently a wheelchair user, and I have been so for 15 years. I would say that here in Eugene, I have found that I really have very little challenges with riding the bus, but there are some challenges with where stops are located, that there isn't a concrete pad when I get off. So the driver has to figure out where to let me off. And it's not, I mean, it's always close to the bus stop, but it may not be the safest option. And I would also say, piggybacking on what Alyssa said, is that I've lived here for 8 years, and there are a ton of places I would like to be able to go, but there are no services that can take me there. And recreation, I mean, Oregon is beautiful. I would love to go see a waterfall or go on a trailhead that's wheelchair friendly, and I can't. And if I can, I don't know what those services are or how to get those services. I've never seen those services. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, thank you, Becky. That was very helpful. And you bring up a good point about the access to transit, right? So it's one thing when you're on the vehicle, but it's also, can you get to the bus, or when you're off the bus, can you get to your destination safely, comfortably, easily? And LTD doesn't own the roads that they operate on, right? So this is where we kind of think about our partner agencies and how this plan can help look towards improving things for LTD's bus network as well. Jesse, I think, was next.
Kind of piggybacking what Becky was saying. My son uses a wheelchair, and so having access to wheelchair accessible vehicles in transit is going to be vital for him once he turns 18 and wants to start living more independently. But also I want to acknowledge that Ride Source does work well. Their vehicles are good. A lot of the people who work as drivers are very friendly and good at their job. For the most part, timing to get to appointments is really good, which is great because then people aren't being forced out of their appointments for being late. But being picked up and taken home in a timely manner, not so great. Also very limited to the service areas, and also very limited to OHP, and also very limited to recreation, because that's not something that's considered necessary for a person's health, I guess. I disagree, but that's why I'm here to talk about it.
Sorry. Thank you, Jesse. I think Eric was next.
It'll come as no surprise that for some major events that are held in downtown Eugene, and there are lots of those, there's sometimes it can be very, depending on the event, it can be very difficult to find parking. or it can be difficult. Well, or you can find parking, but then you have to walk half an hour to get to the event and so forth. So my wife and I found the bus very helpful for that. We live, as I say, we live in Bethel. Sometimes we can just take the bus down to the transit center and then walk a couple of blocks from there. A lot of stuff because it's a very centralized location. Other times, what we'll have to do is take a bus or continue travel on from the event from the transit center to the destinations, and that works very well. So at least for us anyway, it's been very helpful. So as far as the time is the time involved and the frequency, that seems to work out pretty well. It seems to be a wash. I mean, even if we decide to try and park and so forth, we don't really save any time. So you might as well use the bus, maybe create a little bit less carbon, and certainly a lot less frustration. It's much more convenient and comfortable to ride the bus in those circumstances. So the only thing I would say as far as the barriers that I know of personally is that LTD recommends a particular app for your phone to use to help you navigate your way through the system and keep track of the buses and all those sorts of things. And I'm not lazy. I use lots of apps, and I'm willing to put in the time to try and figure out how to get them to work. But I'm really puzzled by this one. It's not. I've been using computers for 50 years and smartphones for 30 years or whatever it is. So it's not that I don't know about technology or don't use it, but somehow or other, it just is not intuitive for me. And maybe it's just me. Maybe it works just fine for everybody else, but I've had a difficult time with this.
Great. Thanks, Eric. On your first comment, I think the point about how LTDs you use LTD for accessing big events, which probably aren't happening every day. You're not using LTD to get to a big event every day, but there are people who use transit every single day, and then there are people who use it once in a while. And so we're trying to think of everybody and all the different kind of use cases for transit, right? Alyssa, I think you had your hand up.
Sorry, I don't want to captivate or take over the conversation, but one of the things that I think about with transit and issues that we see up here and trying to get people out to recreational spots. So, we partner with the Forest Service, for example, because that's the land use manager out here, but we have to have a federal permit to do what we do. So it's not as simple as somebody owning a van and driving people to and fro. So just something to think about as we talk about how do we get people out to do, how do we expand access for people who want to recreate out here and who may not want to drive all the way out here, may not be able to drive out here. Or, the other issue is that we've got all of our most popular sites. We have tiny parking lots that don't have, enough capacity for all the visitors. So, people rely on us, or we've had a number of occasions where a trail is partially closed and the Forest Service will say, hey, can you do some free shuttles from this point to this point to get people around this closure? And we do it because, we want to help out, but just something to think about as we think about community partners and how do we get people. And this is really about recreation. And then to what Eric was talking about, we have Horse Creek and I think other shuttle providers, we've been asked to help out in Eugene when there are big events, and we've done shuttles down there, but trying to figure out a way to do it in a way that's cost effective, so that we can pay our bills, pay our employees, pay for fuel, and we're not having to charge our riders an exorbitant amount. It's a tough thing to do as a small business. So I've been in conversations with Travel Lane County, Travel Oregon about if and when we can coordinate some transit options. Are there grants available? Can we subsidize? For those of us who have, for example, those permits that allow us to take people, they can park at the ranger station and we can drive them up to a waterfall. We can drive them to the Blue Pool. We can drive them other places, so that, they're not having to pay like $20 a pop to do that. But yeah, anyway, just thoughts that are coming to my mind.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Alyssa. Appreciate it. And then Becky, was your hand up from before, or do you have something else to add?
Just one more thing. What Eric said, I agree with. The app is not user friendly, in my opinion. It is very confusing, and I have never been able to figure it out. And I've even come into the station, the Eugene station, to ask for assistance, and it's still a very difficult app to navigate. And so I don't use it at all. And it would be helpful if I could use it for some of my travel needs.
All right, great. Thanks, Becky.
Can I ask just a quick clarifying question to make sure where you understand the specific app, since there are two apps that we do have incorporated into LTD's recommendations, including Transit app and then also the UMO Fair Payment app. It'd be helpful for us to have context around which one. Or accept Transit in the chat. Is that the same for you, Becky?
Yes.
Okay.
And I may have misunderstood something about that. I thought I saw something in one of your notices or something along those lines that you were steering people towards transit app and away from UMO. I mean, maybe that's what I need to do is just go back to UMO if that's what, if you're still using that also. So I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, we have both. Right now we have recommended transit for trip planning, but UMO for fare payment. But there are some trip planning features built into UMO as well, so that will work for trip planning as well. But thank you for the helpful feedback.
Great. Martina.
Yeah, well, I wanted to speak from the perspective of a like a community-based nonprofit who directs clients to your services, and I wanted to say that one of the things that works really well for us is that UMO app or UMO, whatever we're calling it. It's really convenient for us to buy fare for people, and we also really appreciate the discounted fares that we're able to access. That makes it possible for our organization to spread our money a lot further and to ensure that more people are getting access to those services. So those are really convenient for us. It's wonderful that we're able to both pay for fare and then also reload fare onto people's cards, even if they don't have the physical card. So we're able to do that over the phone, and that is really convenient for our clients, particularly because if they have to come into our office, they need transit fare to get to our office, and that's a little bit of a catch-22. One of the things that I would say in terms of a barrier that we see often, so as I said, we're often supporting people who are coming from or going to the hospital to receive services in the acute aftermath of an experience of violence. And unfortunately, you can't time those very well around the bus schedule. So quite often we have people who are in the unfortunate position of trying to figure out how to get home or get back to the place where they're staying after leaving the hospital. And that's often in the middle of the night. And of course, we know that, right, transit cannot run 24 hours a day in a town like Eugene. But we often find that that is a pretty big barrier for people and that there aren't a lot of options later in the evening. We also find that it is just difficult for people to get to that central hub and then get out to the other places that they're trying to go for services. Eugene has a really wonderful network of community partners and community programs that serve folks, but we are spread out all around the community. And indeed all around like Lane County. And so that can be pretty difficult for folks when they're coming to SAS for one service and then we're sending them to Hope and Safety Alliance for another and then to for Good for a third service and then they're going to Food for Lane County. And that is a full-time job just to ride the bus to all of those places. So I don't know the solution for that, of course, but I do think that one of the barriers that we often see has to do with that like systems navigation around the network of services in Lane County.
Great. Thanks, Martina. I really appreciate that. Braden.
Yeah, I know in talking about the apps, when I first used the UMO app, it was hard to set up the payment for that. So it's great for me now, but I just struggled a little bit with it at first. And in doing that and trying to pay with cash, I know the $1.75 isn't the most like easy fare to pay with cash. I'm like, wait, do I have quarters round? Do I have 3/4? I am loving the dollar days of summer promotion though.
Great. Thanks, Braden. I do want to move us on to vision and goals here in just a second. And this kind of second question is actually getting a little bit towards that around how Connect 2045 can guide the future of mobility in our region. So before we get there, I guess wanted to do final call for any other barriers or things that you think are working particularly well today. Again, not the last opportunity to talk about these things, but if you haven't had a chance to speak yet, we're all ears. No pressure. All right. I think I'm going to move us on to the next discussion piece too, just to keep us on time. So vision and goals. So as I said, one of the things we want to do at the outset of this project is set some goals and ideally a vision for us to be working towards as we're thinking about needs and improvements. And the discussion we were just having is helping to get us there already around like what sorts of things are working well and what might we want to change or think about addressing. So if we're visioning, and this is a question for you all. So imagine it's 20-ish years from now, it's June 2045. What has changed? What have we accomplished as a result of investments from this plan? Or what kind of outcomes have we achieved? Outcomes can be things like it's easier to get to X, or as Martina was talking about, perhaps it's easier for people to get to and between services on a given day, or perhaps the bus is running later at night. So this is kind of broad, but the intent here is to help us kind of think forward about what we could achieve, and then like what is the outcome from that. So we had here, write down or think, whatever you want to do. 3 words or sentences that describe transit and mobility and in Lane County in 2045. Right. So I'm going to pause just for a second to let you think about this, and then we'd really appreciate your thoughts on this. So I'm going to give us 30 seconds here to cogitate. Okay, and there's a way to do background music on Zoom for these kind of things, so it's not just like silence, but I don't know how to do it. Maybe we'll figure that out for the next time.
We were talking about that earlier.
Because I've definitely been on calls where they know how to do it. So
the Jeopardy tune works really well.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Eric. And Eric, I think you had your hand up right off the bat. So if you'd like to start.
I don't know if you're looking for specific ideas, specific kinds of things, or just sort of general sorts of things, but I'll just put this out here. So we're getting closer and closer to having the ability to use self-driving vehicles, self-driving cars and stuff. And then the other thing that to take into consideration is that AI has tremendous potential in lots of different areas, and certainly it could be applied here as well. And I don't know how that applies to a transit. Well, you don't use just buses; you use other forms of other types of vehicles and so forth. So it just is a really wild thought. You might start thinking about what happens if self-driving vehicles become safe and useful and relatively inexpensive to use, because what that would do is it would solve it would meet a lot of the criteria that I read about in the article you recommended to us about what's important and what are the considerations and what motivates people to ride mass transit and so forth. Of course, individual vehicles are not mass transit per se, but it offers certain advantages in terms of getting you from point A to point B by the shortest possible route. You don't have to go where the bus goes. It's from point A to point B, which is sort of the ideal circumstance. So I think the combination of those two things might help LTD get closer to some of the ideal types of services that are mentioned in that article. So I guess what I'm saying is keep an eye out for these things as they develop. Make it part of your plan to be paying attention to what the opportunities might be as technology advances. I guess that's that's the general pitch that I'm.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So like keeping an eye on these emerging technologies and being proactive about how we're thinking about them rather than maybe reactive, right?
Yeah.
Ideally.
Yes.
Thank you. Becky.
I would love to see more access for people with disabilities and mobility challenge who use mobility aids to more regions of the county at the very least, whether it's recreational, whether it's visiting a friend or family, just having that access. And also, someone mentioned something about hospital stays. Yeah, it is quite a challenge, especially in a wheelchair. You know, if I'm in the ER and I get released at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's like, well, how do I get home? There's no bus running, you know. And I just recently learned that there is some possibilities with ride source in those scenarios, but not everyone knows that. And so that would be very beneficial in my opinion.
More services, more service at different hours, and it sounds like also just like better information in the community about the services, so people know how to use them and where to use them. Great, thanks, Becky. Let's go Alyssa, and then Carly, and then I reserve the right to call on a few people. And I was going to ask Stella to comment after Alyssa and Carly, if you don't mind, Stella.
Yeah, I'll go. I would say that, you know, in my vision, community partnerships exist with small businesses. And, you know, again, this is like really focused on the rural areas, the outlying areas, where we can use small businesses who have the requisite permits and equipment to help get visitors and, you know, community members to those congested trailheads, recreational sites. And also, yeah, visitors don't have to rely on individual vehicles to access these, you know, very congested sites, these overused, over visited areas. And that local community members don't have more flexibility in being able to get, you know, run errands and get to and from town, whether that's through a, you know, LTD or it's like a community partnership. So yeah, and I'm done.
Thanks, Alyssa. So a future with more recreational access and helping kind of alleviate some of those congested trailheads in the summer. I think it was Carly, and then Stella, and then Jesse.
So I was just listening to everybody, and there's so much insight. If I were to kind of sum it up, something that I would really like to see for a future goal would be expanding kind of the definition of health and healthcare access, to include whole person health, which would include things like connection to land and recreation, and, you know, potentially like um, food security, you know, looking at transportation as health access through ride source. I think coming to the table, bringing accessibility as my primary kind of like concern with our client population and patient population, that if we look at health and healthcare to kind of redefine or widen our scope of what we see that as, to include whole person care.
Great, thanks, Carly, for kind of like summarizing the comments we're receiving here. That's great. Stella, thanks for letting me pick on you. Do you have any?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I was going to say that something that I would like to see in the future would probably be improved accessibility and just being able to get to like as a student who's in the like Eugene campus, University of Oregon, like campus. It's a little more difficult to get to neighboring cities. Like for instance, I have a job in Springfield during the school year, and it's a 8-minute drive, but like an hour and 45-minute bus ride. And the service isn't frequent. So as much as I would love to use transit to get to my job, it's just kind of out of the picture. So being able to have transit to those neighboring cities from Eugene would be great.
Great, thanks, Dawn. So connections, but also making sure that they're fast enough to meet people's schedules, right?
Yeah, so like improved reliability would be great.
Great, thanks, Dawn. Jesse.
Okay, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent on the community health assessment, but part of the data that we gather is looking at how many people put off medical care because of lack of transportation, lack of ability to take time off of work, and a lot of things. And another thing that I ran into is a lack of transportation services for people who otherwise don't receive disability services or even necessarily OHP, who have to go in for a surgery that requires them to have an adult pick them up and monitor them for a certain amount of time after they get taken home. Not everybody has a family or friend that can do that in their life. And that is, I feel, a needed service in our area that relates both to the health of the community and transportation. And then also, I want to share in the chat a link to David's chair, which is a really cool thing that will take you to certain like beaches, or I think they have them at Mount Pisgah, where they have these really cool like tank track style wheelchairs so that you could go on cool trails instead of being limited to what your normal mobility device can go to. So I'll share that.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Appreciate it. Let's go Jacob, Martina, and Heather.
My ideas kind of have two focuses. First being zero emission, cleaner, greener. Definitely as we kind of already have a focus, but even more so moving forward as the climate change problems accelerate. And then I would say second point, something to do with focus on trams, something that those vehicles that don't have wheels, which I think every vehicle in the system currently uses. I think trams would be a lot more agile to navigate traffic and congested areas versus the current BRT buses that we see in our network right now.
Great, thank you, Jacob. Martina?
Yeah, so if I'm thinking about like June 2045, I'm trying to think like big picture fantasy, what would I want to see in the world? And I think what I would envision would be like a transit system that's so well woven into the community that people don't actually have to be experts in order to access all of the services that you all offer. I mean, I'm hearing so many people on this call who have figured out so many wonderful ways to navigate through like official and maybe some unofficial or community-based resources. And that's wonderful. And also, I would love to see the ability for people to not have to plan ahead with that amount of forethought, to not have to know what the fare is, to have more fare-free zones where they can hop on or hop off. And in particular, you know, the people that we serve are people who are incredibly vulnerable and who are often in really at-risk positions in their lives, and their brains are not necessarily able to focus on bus routes in the same way. You know, when a person's in acute trauma, right, the ability to navigate a system like that is not always as accessible or easy. So I would love to see a system that like accounts for some of that, where people can get where they need to go at a moment's notice, or where they can be in a vulnerable position and find themselves in a place where they can get care rather than having to you know, be a navigator themselves.
Okay, thanks, Martina. So it's a seamless system. Let's go Heather and then Larissa.
Sort of to piggyback on some of the comments that Martina just made, I think it would be incredible to live in a community where it's not even a second thought. It's like, I'm a bus rider. I think, you know, as somebody who grew up here, I still am in conversations with many business owners or colleagues that they've never rode the bus at all. And so one thing that I really enjoyed to learn more about is my son's 12 and he got a one pass. And one of the summer camps that he went to, the whole time they were riding the LTD bus and teaching him how to use that. And so it would just be incredible to, see a generation really grow up in that environment. And that's something that I've always admired about other cities that I've visited. It's, you see kiddos and all sorts of generations on the bus. And I personally haven't seen that as much, but I don't personally use the bus as much as I should.
Great, thanks, Heather. Yeah, I think it's well known that if you start using transit at a younger age, you're more likely to be an adult transit user as well. So, Larissa.
Thank you. I really appreciate this question and the the like appreciative questioning, the imagination, getting going. And what do we envision for the future of our community? I would love to, in 2045 have such a densely networked transit system that it's not a question of can I get to where I need to go today and do I have the time to figure that out, but which of the many options do I want to take to get where I need to go, and what is that going to enable me to do something else? Is that going to stop, drop me off right next to my favorite bookstore? Wouldn't that be neat? Kind of building in consumer choice is like maybe a cynical way of saying it, but a sense that, as Martina said, the transit system is so interwoven into our community. You don't have to be an expert and you don't have to work hard to make it work for your life. Also, everyone at every income level using the bus. I think that that's, kind of touching back on what Heather said, that it's a community asset, and not for, one sector or some sectors of the community, but for everyone.
That's great. Thank you, Larissa. Braden.
Yeah, really just echoing what the people before me have said. I think absolutely transit system where it is the most convenient and it's easy and it's safe and everyone kind of just has that ingrained in them and it's natural. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to take the bus because it's the best way to get there.
Great. Thanks, Braden. Anybody else who hasn't had a chance to speak yet want to chime in with any thoughts here or echoing anything else, something else, echoing things that someone else has said? Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate your thoughts about the future such that we can know it. We have a couple more things here to just talk with you and a couple more discussion questions that probably will elicit some of the same thoughts from you all, but I want to make sure we're getting the full spectrum of input here. I'm actually going to skip over the draft vision statement we have and ask another question of you. So some of this, again, we've already been talking about, right? Like I think Eric brought up, the future of technology, which is something that might be coming in the near future that we need to be thinking about. So one question is what issues might be coming up or emerging that maybe haven't come to a head now, but will be in the near future that we should be thinking about? The world has changed post-COVID in many different ways, for example, and so how are we responding to that? And then, kind of similar to the question around vision, like if we could achieve one or two things, what would those be in your mind? Kind of like the top priorities. So, Jesse.
So one of the things that I'm aware of is the lack of transportation funding. And the reduction in transportation funding and the need to rethink how we fund our transportation to make sure that decrease in funding doesn't mean decrease in services, decrease in health outcomes of our community. And then, gosh, if we could achieve two things in the next 20 years, it would be to fill the gaps that people have been asking to be filled for, well, the last 20 years.
And Jesse, so are those gaps some of the things we're talking about here tonight, or do you have more specific things in mind?
Just the things we've already listed, so as to not be redundant.
Gotcha. Great, thank you. Anybody else with some things we should be thinking about, emerging trends? Jesse talked about transportation funding, which is obviously something we're going to be thinking about and is going to be an issue. There's other things happening in the community that we should be aware of or should be thinking about. We've talked a little bit about housing or cost of living kinds of issues, but Eric.
There is, at least among some people within the city of Eugene, for example, and it extends out to Lane County when you're talking about the Eugene Airport. Actually, it extends out to a region all around Lane County, but certainly it includes Lane County and LTD and so forth. People are beginning to think about the idea that in order to fund city governments and other governments to provide the services that we need and also that people like to have, both of those, and also to improve our economic future, we need to be doing a lot more development and trying to find ways to attract more employers to Eugene and to Lane County. And you may or may not agree that that's a need, but there are a lot of people that think that it is. And so there are a number of initiatives that are taking shape to try to do that. And if some of those should come to fruition, and one I'll mention directly is that the Eugene Airport is undertaking about a $500 million expansion project because the airport itself is for the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years has been at or over capacity. They just don't have space. The concourses and gates to handle the traffic that we might be able to handle if we had a larger airport. And there are other kinds of things. And someone's already mentioned this. We're desperately in need of more housing at many different income levels. And I assume I'm certainly no expert, but I assume that if some of that comes to fruition, if we're able to add more jobs and expand and bring more businesses, and also more visitors to Eugene, more tourism, those kinds of things, that's gonna present both a need and an opportunity for LTD. I think it's something that you asked, are there things that LTD should be aware of? And I'm sure your institutional partners in this process that you mentioned at the beginning of this are giving you that information. But there are also other organizations like neighborhood organizations and so forth that are very much interested in this because there are also parts of the city that are could very much benefit from more economic development. And I think Bethel happens to be one of them. So anyway, that's something that I think you might want to keep in mind.
Great, thank you, Eric. We're going to go Jesse and then Carly, and then Alejandro or Jacob, if you guys had any thing to add here too, that'd be great. Jesse.
When you said housing, and then after listening to Eric, I also remembered something that's going on out in Veneta is we're bolstering infrastructure, expecting more housing development out here, including low-income housing, as people increasingly commute to work in the metro area but live in the rural area. We are going to definitely have to increase the transportation infrastructure to allow for that increase in rural commuting.
Great, thank you, Jesse. So pointing out those other areas of Lane County that are continuing to grow as well. Carly.
Yes. So we are currently experiencing an access to mental health crisis in the state, and I believe that is going to get worse before it gets better. Serious mental illness is a huge barrier to accessing public transit. And I don't know what that might look like for supportive services. I don't know if it's like a peer type of initiative or just looking at some of the barriers like the apps for people who have serious mental illness. But I do think that this is an issue that it's currently something that we face with our client populations and helping them get transportation. But I think that it is going to, in the near future, increase.
Great, thank you, Carly. Yeah, and then Alejandro or Jacob yeah, go ahead, Alejandro.
Perfect. Two things that I'd like to achieve in the next 20 years, or maybe even issues that might come up in the near future. One big one for me that I can think of is employer expectations when it comes to mobility. Large employees like, Peace Health, University of Oregon, city, county, whatever you may expect, are kind of expecting everything to be kind of have everyone to have seamless access. So if transit can't keep pace, it's going to cause more congestion, more parking demand, things like that. So the goal would be to make sure that we're keeping pace with having all these large employers have access for all their employees. Another big one for me being in the industry too is just making sure that we can keep up with the seasonal demand spikes. Obviously, we have a lot of tourism that comes into the city, and we have a lot of people in town. And so making sure that we can keep up with the seasonal demand spikes, not only bringing tourism in, but making sure that we can, as a city, have our regular folks still not be as affected as everybody else.
That's great. Thank you, Alejandro. And then Jacob, just wanted to check to see if you had anything there too.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, what's showing up for me is just a lot more intentionality around building housing on, frequent or the fast transit lines and are in proximity to stations. And not everybody will agree with me, but I'd also say the fact that we have 75 acres, that's the fairgrounds. That could be like a synergistic transportation housing like hub for people from all income types is ridiculous. So that's my contribution. And I was going to share what I think the world's going to be like in 2045, but I don't want to be a downer.
Thanks, Jacob.
Yep.
All right. I want to do last call for any other thoughts on these or kind of broadly any of the other questions or prompts we've had for you tonight. And I should also mention that if something comes to mind between now and our next meeting, and you feel free to email Carrie and Dave, and we'll make sure to get that from you. So not your last opportunity to comment again. Dave, Carrie, Ashley, are there any other questions or follow-ups you have before I kind of move us on to the last piece of the presentation? Oh, Jesse, you raised your hand. Sorry.
I just have a quick question. Could you email us this presentation so that we could review it? That way, if we do have further thoughts, it's accessible.
Yeah, definitely. We will do that.
Yeah, it looks like maybe Carrie wanted to say something, but I'll just chime in and say this has been a really good discussion today, and just really appreciate all the input and diverse perspectives that we've heard tonight. So it's been really helpful to get us started down this path.
Yeah, I just wanted to also say thank you all for sharing your perspectives and your experiences. I feel like that's just really valuable for us to hear. So yeah, just appreciate hearing what you have to say.
Great. Okay. So to wrap us up, we do have some draft goals. So I think the feedback tonight is really helpful for us. This conversation, talking with the technical advisory group, we're meeting with the board later in August, and we're going out to the general public for an open house on August 11th, don't know why I cannot keep the date straight, but that's right. Okay, Carrie's nodding. And so we're taking all this feedback, including yours, to help us hone these goals. And here's just kind of the working goals we have. There's some more words behind these, and we'll share this with you as well after the meeting. But I think a lot of the things we talked about tonight hit on a lot of the things that are on this PowerPoint. So thanks again for that discussion. So next steps, looking at September-ish for the next meeting. So there, we plan to share with you a little bit more about existing and future conditions. So that'll be more on the ground information about what's out there today, who's using the services, how are they using the services that exist, what do we know about future land use changes? I think Jesse mentioned, people are moving to Bonita, right? So like where are we expecting population increase and things like that to help our planning. So we'll share that with you. And then we really want to have a discussion building on tonight around specific needs so that we can get towards, what investments and improvements are needed. And then we have our first open house on August 11th. We'll be sharing more of about that with you very shortly. And again, we'd really appreciate you kind of helping us get the word out to your networks so we can get good turnout at that open house. And then LTD is also going to be tabling at various events throughout the summer and fall where we're going to be able to get feedback from people at different opportunities. So stay tuned for more information, and we will send out this presentation and a couple other follow-up items after this meeting. So thanks again. I mean, I really appreciate all of your time and then all of the thoughtful discussion and input tonight. It's very helpful to us, the project team, so we can develop a plan that's actually addressing the needs of this community. So Dave or Carrie, would you add anything else?
No, I'm happy to give people some time back if they want it.
Let's all go get dinner.
Jesse, I see your hand.
Is there a flyer for any of that I could share with the other organizations I'm with?
Yeah, we will have that imminently, I think this week. So.
And we do have a project website up, and I will just put it in the chat really quick here. It has a lot of those details, and we're putting together a handout that we're gonna share at all of our tabling events, so we can make that available to folks here as well. There's the link to our project page.
Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks.